On a dreary, rain-soaked afternoon in New York City, the shimmering facade of the Bennett Grand Hotel loomed like a beacon of hope amidst the gloom. The glossy marble floors and crystal chandeliers sparkled under the soft glow of the elegant lighting, creating an atmosphere of wealth and privilege that contrasted sharply with the reality outside. As the rain poured relentlessly from the heavens, a small figure appeared at the entrance, hesitating for a moment before stepping inside. It was Tommy Evans, an 11-year-old boy whose clothes clung to him, soaked through and ragged, his hair matted from the downpour. He stood at the threshold, awash in a wave of uncertainty as he surveyed the opulence surrounding him. Guests draped in designer clothing strolled past, their laughter echoing in the high ceilings, oblivious to the boy standing alone. Tommy's heart raced. He felt like a ghost in a world that had long since forgotten him. The warmth of the hotel beckoned him, but a gnawing fear gripped his stomach. Would they see him? Or worse, would they turn him away? Despite the anxiety swirling within him, Tommy's determination prevailed. He pushed the door open wider and stepped inside, the sound of his squelching shoes drowned out by the chatter of well-to-do patrons. He took a deep breath, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the faint aroma of luxury perfumes, and moved further inside, his eyes darting around, searching for something, anything, that could fill his empty stomach. At the reception desk, Sarah Mitchell was busy attending to a guest. As she glanced up, her gaze fell upon Tommy. Her heart sank at the sight of the boy, drenched and shivering. She could see the mix of desperation and determination etched on his face, and it struck a chord deep within her. "Excuse me, sir," Sarah interrupted her conversation with the guest, her voice gentle yet firm. "I'll be right back." She stepped away from the desk, approaching Tommy with an air of compassion. "Hey there, are you all right? Do you need help?" Tommy looked up, taken aback by her kindness. He hesitated, the words tangled in his throat. I just wanted something to eat," he finally confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of course. Come with me," Sarah said without hesitation, her heart swelling with empathy. She beckoned him to follow her, leading him through the bustling lobby towards the hotel's kitchen. As they walked, she glanced back at him, noticing how he kept his head down, avoiding the curious stares of the passing guests. Inside the kitchen, the atmosphere was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold rain outside. The aroma of simmering sauces and baked bread filled the air, making Tommy's stomach rumble audibly. He looked around, wide-eyed at the bustling staff who moved with purpose, chopping vegetables and stirring pots, all while exchanging jokes and laughter. "Donna Rosa," Sarah called out, her voice cutting through the ambient noise. An older woman, her hair tied back in a neat bun, looked up from her station, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sarah, who's this?" Donna Rosa asked, noticing Tommy standing shyly behind Sarah. "This is Tommy," Sarah explained, kneeling down to Tommy's level. "He's hungry and needs some help." Donna Rosa's expression softened, and she approached Tommy with a warm smile. "Well, hello, Tommy. You must be starving. Come, let's see what we can find for you to eat." Tommy felt a flicker of hope ignite within him as he followed Donna Rosa to the pantry. "I can help," he offered, his voice more confident now. "I know how to chop vegetables." Donna Rosa chuckled, her eyes twinkling. "Is that so? We could use an extra pair of hands around here. But first, let's get you something warm to fill that belly of yours." As Donna Rosa began to prepare a simple meal, Sarah watched from the doorway, her heart swelling with gratitude and admiration. Tommy, despite his circumstances, was eager to lend a hand, showing a spirit that was both resilient and inspiring. She couldn't help but wonder about his story, what had brought him to this moment, and how he had ended up alone in the rain. "Tommy, do you have a place to stay?" Sarah inquired gently, her concern evident in her voice. Tommy paused, his small hands fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. "No, ma'am," he admitted, his voice growing quiet. "I've been living on the streets since my family." His words trailed off, the pain evident in his eyes. Donna Rosa, overhearing the conversation, turned to Tommy, her heart aching for the boy. "You're safe here, Corrido. We'll make sure you have a meal, and a place to rest for a while. Tommy looked up, surprise flashing across his face. Really? You'd do that for me? Of course, Dona Rosa replied with warmth. Everyone deserves a bit of kindness, especially on a day like today. Sarah stepped closer, her heart heavy with the knowledge of Tommy's struggles. You're not alone anymore, Tommy. We're here to help you. He smiled shyly, the weight of his worries beginning to lift, even if just a little. Thank you, he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of relief and disbelief. I didn't know if anyone would care. As the meal cooked, the three of them shared stories, the kitchen filled with laughter and a sense of camaraderie. Tommy felt a flicker of belonging, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. The warmth of the kitchen, the kindness of Sarah and Dona Rosa. It was all so new and comforting. Just then, Sarah noticed a figure standing at the entrance of the kitchen. It was Edward Bennett, the owner of the hotel, his expression stern as he surveyed the scene before him. The joy in the room seemed to dim in his presence, and Tommy instinctively took a step back, unsure of how the man would react. What's going on here? Edward asked, his voice firm. Why is there a child in my kitchen? Sarah straightened up, determination flashing in her eyes. He's hungry, Edward. He needs help. Edward crossed his arms, unimpressed. There are policies for a reason, Sarah. We can't just, but he's a child. Sarah interrupted, her voice rising slightly. He's alone and in need. We can't turn our backs on him just because of a policy. Tommy stood quietly, feeling the tension in the air. He could sense that Edward was not the kind of man who easily softened, but there was something in Sarah's voice that stirred hope within him. Edward's gaze shifted to Tommy, assessing him with a critical eye. And what about you, boy? What's your story? Tommy swallowed hard, feeling exposed under Edward's scrutiny. I lost my family, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. I've been trying to survive. Edward's expression remained impassive, but for a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes, an acknowledgement of the boy's pain. But as quickly as it appeared, it vanished behind the wall he had built around himself. Get back to your duties, Sarah, Edward commanded, his tone brooking no argument. We don't have time for this. As he turned to leave, Sarah felt a surge of frustration boiling within her. Edward, she called after him, her voice steady. This isn't just about business. This is about being human. We can't ignore those in need, especially when we have the means to help. Edward paused, his back to her, the weight of her words hanging in the air. He didn't turn around, but Tommy could see the tension in his posture. There was a battle raging within the man, and for the first time, Tommy dared to hope that perhaps, just perhaps, Edward might reconsider, if only for a moment. In that bustling kitchen, amidst the aromas of cooking and the sound of laughter, Tommy felt a sense of warmth that had long been absent from his life. As he chopped vegetables alongside Dona Rosa, he began to believe that he could find a place in this world again, even if only for a fleeting moment. Tommy sat at the small table in the bustling kitchen of the Bennett Grand Hotel, the warmth of the room enveloping him like a long-lost embrace. He could hardly believe his luck. Just hours ago, he had been wandering the rain-soaked streets of New York, his stomach growling with hunger and his heart heavy with sorrow. Now, he was surrounded by the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread and simmering sauces, a stark contrast to the cold and damp life he had been enduring on the streets. Across from him, Sarah Mitchell, the kind-hearted receptionist who had taken him under her wing, watched him with a mixture of curiosity and compassion. So, Tommy, she asked gently, how did you end up out there, all alone? Tommy looked down at his plate, pushing the steaming food around with his fork. He hesitated, the memories flooding back, memories of laughter, of love, of a family that felt like a lifetime away. It was an accident, he finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. My mom and dad, they were in a car crash. I was supposed to be with them, but I stayed at home with my little sister. When I woke up that morning, everything changed. Dona Rosa, the head chef, paused in her work, her heart aching for the boy. She had seen many hardships in her life and could relate to his pain. Oh, Corito, she said softly, her Spanish accent thickening her words. "I'm so sorry to hear that. You're not alone anymore, you know? You have us now." Tommy looked up, his brown eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But I don't have a home," he said, his voice trembling. "I don't have anyone. I've been living in the park for weeks." Dona Rosa shook her head, her heart swelling with empathy. "For now, you have a place here, Tommy. You can stay as long as you need. You can help me in the kitchen, and I'll teach you how to cook. It'll be like a family." Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth bloom in her chest. "You see, Tommy, you're not just a boy on the streets anymore. You have a family here, even if it's just starting. We care about you." Tommy's brows furrowed as he processed their words. A family? Could he really have that again? A small flame of hope flickered inside him, and for the first time since the accident, he felt a semblance of safety. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice stronger now. "I'd like that." As they shared the meal, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Dona Rosa began to share stories from her own past, recounting how she had come to New York as a young immigrant with nothing but dreams in her heart. "When I first arrived here, I had to sleep in a shelter," she said, stirring a pot of sauce. "But I never lost hope. I worked hard, and I made a life for myself. You can do the same, Tommy." "Really?" Tommy asked, his eyes wide with intrigue. "You mean I could have a life like yours?" "Yes." Sarah chimed in, her enthusiasm infectious. "You have so much potential, Tommy. You just need to believe in yourself." Tommy nodded slowly, the warmth of the kitchen, the laughter echoing around him, and the kindness pouring from Sarah and Dona Rosa began to chip away at the icy barrier he had built around his heart. "I'll try," he promised, a small smile creeping onto his face. "I really will." As the evening wore on, Tommy helped Dona Rosa with the dishes, feeling a sense of belonging that he had long thought lost. He washed the plates while Dona Rosa dried them, and they exchanged playful banter, laughter bubbling up between them like an effervescent tonic for their weary souls. "You know, Tommy, if you keep this up, I might have to pay you," Dona Rosa teased, a playful glint in her eye. Tommy chuckled, the sound bright and carefree. "I'm not sure I could handle the responsibility of being paid. What would I even spend it on?" Sarah leaned against the counter, her heart swelling with joy at the sight of the two bonding. "Maybe a nice warm coat for the winter, or even a new pair of shoes," she suggested, her voice light and full of hope. "Or maybe a toy for my sister," Tommy said, his smile fading slightly as he thought of the sibling he had left behind. "I miss her so much." Dona Rosa placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You will find her again, Tommy. You have to believe that. And we will help you, whatever it takes." The conversation ebbed and flowed, a delicate dance of stories and laughter, and for the first time in a long while, Tommy felt the weight of his past lift just a little. He found solace in their kindness, in their shared meals, and in the sense of community that was slowly wrapping around him like a warm blanket. As the night wore on, and the kitchen grew quiet, Tommy's thoughts began to race. He had come to the hotel seeking just a meal, but now he realized he had found something far more valuable, a chance to reclaim his life, to build a future, and to find a family again. Dona Rosa and Sarah exchanged glances, both women recognizing the profound change taking place within Tommy. They could see the flicker of hope growing brighter, and it filled them with a sense of purpose. They were determined to help this boy find his way, to show him that there was still beauty in the world, even amidst the pain. "Tommy," Sarah said, her voice soft but firm, "you don't have to face this alone. We're here for you, every step of the way. Together, we can figure this out." Tommy looked up at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I won't forget this. I promise." And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of the kitchen, the laughter of newfound friends, and the aroma of food that was more than just sustenance, Tommy finally felt a glimmer of hope for the future. A future where he could rebuild, reclaim, and perhaps, just perhaps, find his way back to the family he had lost. On a dreary afternoon in New York City, the rain fell relentlessly, creating a shimmering curtain of droplets that softened the sharp edges of the bustling streets. Inside the opulent Bennett Grand Hotel, The scent of polished wood and expensive perfume intermingled with the sounds of laughter and soft music wafting through the lobby. Amidst this world of luxury, a small figure stood out, his clothes tattered and his hair soaked from the rain. Tommy Evans, an 11-year-old boy, had entered the hotel with a mixture of hope and trepidation, his stomach growling louder than the conversations of the well-dressed guests around him. Tommy took a moment to collect himself, his wide eyes scanning the lavish surroundings. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm light over the marble floors, while the guests, dressed in their finest attire, moved about with an air of indifference to the boy's plight. An overwhelming sense of loneliness washed over him, but his determination to survive pushed him forward. He had come for one thing, and one thing only: food. As he stepped further into the lobby, the receptionist, Sarah Mitchell, noticed the small boy standing awkwardly, drenched and shivering. With a heart full of compassion, she approached him, her smile warm and inviting. "Hey there," she said gently, bending down to meet his gaze. "You look like you could use some help. Are you okay?" Tommy hesitated, his pride battling with his hunger. He looked up at her, the kindness in her eyes drawing him in. I just wanted something to eat," he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't had anything all day." Sarah's heart ached at the boy's confession. She knew the hotel had resources that could help him, and she wasn't about to turn her back on someone in need. "Come with me," she said softly, gesturing for him to follow her. "I work here, and I think we can find you something to eat." As they walked through the back corridors of the hotel, Tommy felt a flicker of hope. Sarah led him to the kitchen, where the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread and simmering sauces filled the air. There, he met Donna Rosa, the head chef, a woman whose warmth radiated as brightly as the stove she tended. When she saw Sarah with the boy, a look of surprise crossed her face. "Who's this, Sarah?" Donna Rosa inquired, wiping her hands on her apron. "This is Tommy," Sarah introduced, her voice filled with empathy. "He's been living on the streets and just needs a meal." Donna Rosa's expression softened as she knelt down to Tommy's level. "Oh, mi niño, you must be so hungry. Come, let me make you a plate." Tommy's stomach growled again, louder this time, and he could hardly believe his luck. As Donna Rosa set to work, she chatted with him, asking questions about his life. "Do you like pasta?" she asked, her hands moving deftly as she prepared a hearty dish. "I love it," Tommy replied, his eyes alight with anticipation. "It's my favorite." Within moments, Donna Rosa placed a steaming plate of pasta before him. Tommy's heart soared as he picked up the fork, the first real meal he had in what felt like ages. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he took his first bite. Sarah watched the boy eat, a sense of fulfillment washing over her. She knew that providing food was just the beginning. She wanted to help him in deeper ways. But there was one more person in the hotel who needed to be involved: the owner, Edward Bennett. She felt a surge of determination. If anyone could make a significant change, it was him. After Tommy finished his meal, Sarah took a deep breath and led him back to the front of the hotel, where Edward's office was located. The plush carpets and ornate decor felt overwhelming, and Tommy's heart raced as they approached the large oak door. Sarah knocked gently, and a voice from inside called out, "Come in." As they entered, they found Edward Bennett seated at his grand desk, poring over financial reports. He looked up, his expression one of mild annoyance. "What is it, Sarah?" he asked, his tone brisk. "Mr. Bennett," she began, her voice steady despite the tension in her chest. "This is Tommy. He's been living on the streets and came to us for help. I think it's important that you hear his story." Edward's eyes narrowed slightly as he glanced at Tommy, who stood fidgeting with his hands. "Another charity case, I presume?" he remarked, his voice dripping with skepticism. Tommy swallowed hard, feeling the weight of Edward's indifference. I lost my family in an accident," he managed to say, his voice trembling. "I'm just trying to survive." Edward leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Many people have lost family. It's unfortunate, but the world is full of such stories. I can't let every sob story dictate how I run this hotel." Sarah felt her frustration boiling over. But Mr. Bennett, that's exactly the point. It's not just a story. This is a child in need. We can't ignore him because it's inconvenient for us. Edward raised an eyebrow, unbothered by her outburst. And what do you propose I do? Hire him? That would be a PR disaster. Tommy looked down, his heart sinking further. He had hoped for understanding, for a glimmer of empathy, but instead faced a wall of cold indifference. Tommy deserves more than just a fleeting moment of pity, Sarah pressed on, her voice unwavering. He deserves a chance, just like anyone else. Just because we are fortunate doesn't mean we should turn our backs on those who aren't. Everyone has a past, Mr. Bennett, and everyone has the potential to change their lives. You, of all people, should understand that. Edward's expression shifted slightly, the slightest crack in his stoic facade. He opened his mouth to retort, but the words caught in his throat. For a brief moment, he was reminded of his own childhood, of the struggles he faced and the people who helped him along the way. But he quickly pushed those thoughts aside, unwilling to let them cloud his judgment. This is a business, he said finally, his tone regaining its cold edge. I won't waste my resources on pipe dreams. Sarah felt a wave of disappointment wash over her as she looked at Tommy, whose face reflected the pain of rejection. She took a step closer to Edward, her voice lowering to a more personal tone. Is that really the legacy you want to leave behind? A legacy of indifference? You have the power to make a difference, to inspire others through your actions. Isn't that worth considering? Edward shifted in his seat, and for a fleeting moment, he seemed to hesitate. But then, he straightened his back and hardened his resolve. I appreciate your passion, Sarah, but I have a business to run. We can't help everyone. As he turned his attention back to his reports, Sarah could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She glanced at Tommy, who stood silently, his small frame slumped in disappointment. She realized that change wouldn't come easily, but she knew she couldn't give up on him or on Edward. Come on, Tommy, she said gently, taking his hand. Let's go back to the kitchen. As they left the office, Tommy's heart ached. He had hoped for kindness, but instead, he had encountered a wall of apathy. Yet, as they walked down the corridor, Sarah's presence provided a flicker of hope amidst the gloom. Perhaps, with her determination, they could still find a way to break through Edward's indifference and create a path toward a brighter future. Edward Bennett retreated to his office, his mind racing after the conversation with Sarah. He sat at his desk, surrounded by piles of documents and financial reports, but nothing seemed to matter at that moment. His gaze fixed on the window, he watched the rain pouring relentlessly over New York, as if each drop reflected his own emotional state. The city, vibrant and full of life, felt distant, almost like a memory of a past he would prefer to forget. As the drops trickled down the glass, Edward couldn't help but remember his youth, how he had grown up in an environment that demanded resilience. Loneliness had been his constant companion, and the success he had achieved, though undeniable, felt empty. He recalled the nights when he had no money to eat, the feeling of being invisible in the midst of the crowd. A deep sigh escaped his lips, and he found himself questioning, is it worth it if I'm not making a difference in anyone's life? Unbeknownst to him, Edward stood up and decided to walk to the hotel kitchen, where the aroma of home-cooked food filled the air. Upon entering, he spotted Tommy, the homeless boy, standing next to Donna Rosa, who was teaching him how to chop vegetables. The scene was simple yet profoundly touching. The boy, with his hesitant smile, was so focused that he seemed to forget, for a moment, his harsh reality. It's good to see you here, Edward commented, his voice a little softer than usual. He approached, observing the small group that had formed. Donna Rosa looked at him, surprised, but soon a smile formed on her lips. Edward, come, join us. Tommy is learning to prepare a special dish. He has a natural talent, Donna Rosa said, handing a piece of carrot to the boy. Tommy looked up at Edward, a mix of hope and apprehension in his gaze. I'm just helping, sir, he said, a bit nervous. Edward hesitated for a moment, but the sincerity in the boy's eyes touched him. You're doing a great job, Tommy. The food here has always been good, but with you helping, I'm sure it will be even better. A comfortable silence settled in, and Edward found himself watching the two. It was something he hadn't done in a long time. Observing attentively, without the weight of responsibilities that usually consumed him, he noticed how Donna Rosa spoke with affection, as if each word was an encouragement. Tommy smiled, clearly excited by the approval. "Do you like to cook, Tommy?" Edward asked, breaking the ice. "Yes, I do. On the street, I tried to make some things, but I never had the right ingredients," the boy replied, his voice full of enthusiasm. "Donna Rosa let me help, and now I'm learning to make a sauce." "That's amazing. What would you like to cook one day, if you could choose anything?" Edward inquired, intrigued. Tommy thought for a moment, his expression becoming dreamy. "I would love to cook a big dinner for a family, like a feast, with desserts and everything." His eyes lit up, and Edward could see the passion the boy had for cooking. "A feast, huh?" Edward smiled, feeling a warmth in his heart that he hadn't felt in years. "Who knows, maybe one day you'll realize that dream. You have a special talent, and with dedication, you can do anything." Donna Rosa, who had been listening to the conversation, interjected, "Absolutely, Tommy. You can do it. And if you need help, I'll be here to teach you all I know." Edward observed the interaction between the two, and something within him began to change. He remembered how his own life had been filled with loneliness and lack of support. Those memories, which had once made him feel bitter, now seemed to bring a new perspective. He started to question whether the success he had fought so hard to achieve had any value if it wasn't shared with others. "Maybe I should learn to cook too," Edward said, a slight smile on his face. "What do you think, Tommy? Would you teach me?" The boy blinked, surprised. "Of course, sir. You just need to listen to Donna Rosa's instructions. And if you want, I can help you." The lightness of the conversation was interrupted when Edward felt a tightening in his heart. He remembered moments when he wished someone cared about him, that someone had reached out. Now, before Tommy, he realized he had the opportunity to do something different. "I can help, not only in the kitchen, but in other ways too. Sometimes, people need support and I want to be part of that." Donna Rosa smiled, understanding the depth of the change happening within Edward. "That's wonderful, Edward. Kindness and empathy are like ingredients in a recipe. Without them, everything is tasteless." Tommy looked at Edward, his eyes shining with expectation. "Can you help us prepare food for those who have nothing? They need food and care, just like I do." The boy's proposal touched Edward deeply. He had been involved in social causes in his life, but always from a distance, like a mere spectator. Now, the idea of actively getting involved, of making a real difference in someone's life, felt more than just a possibility. It felt like a calling. "Yes, Tommy, I want to do this. I want to help," Edward replied, his voice firm. Something within him had awakened, a passion that had long been dormant. He looked at the two, at the new family that was forming before his eyes. Edward stepped away from the kitchen, but not before turning back to Tommy and Donna Rosa. "I'll meet with the team and see how we can help, not just here, but in our community. It's time to take action." As he walked toward his office, Edward felt a lightness in his heart. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to change. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside him, a new purpose was beginning to blossom. The weight of loneliness was being replaced by hope, and for the first time in a long time, he felt part of something greater. As days passed since Tommy's unexpected arrival at the Bennett Grand Hotel, the atmosphere within the hotel began to shift subtly but significantly. Inspired by Tommy's courage and resilience, Donna Rosa transformed her kitchen into a hub of compassion and warmth. Each morning, as sunlight filtered through the windows, she would gather her ingredients not just for the lavish meals served to the hotel guests, but for something far more meaningful. "Tommy," she called one morning, her voice bubbling with energy, "come help me with the soup today. We're making a big batch for the neighborhood." Tommy, who had quickly become a fixture in the kitchen, rushed to her side, a grin lighting up his face. "What kind of soup, Donna Rosa?" he asked, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Chicken noodle," she replied, her hands busy chopping vegetables. "But we're adding something special today, extra love and a bit of hope. You see, we're not just feeding people. We're giving them a reason to smile. Tommy nodded earnestly, the weight of his past momentarily lifted by the warmth of her words. "Can I help with the spices?" he asked, eager to contribute. "Of course. You have a good nose for flavors, my boy. Just a pinch of this, a sprinkle of that," she encouraged, guiding him through the process. As they cooked together, the kitchen filled with laughter and the comforting aroma of simmering broth, creating an atmosphere that felt like home. Meanwhile, Mike, the hotel security guard, began to notice the changes happening around him. Initially, he had viewed Tommy's presence as a distraction, something that disrupted the normal flow of the hotel. However, the transformation in Dona Rosa and the palpable sense of community began to stir something within him. One afternoon, Mike leaned against the wall of the kitchen, watching Tommy and Dona Rosa work. "You know," he said, breaking the silence, "I used to teach martial arts to kids back in the day. I think I want to start doing that again. Maybe for some of the kids in the neighborhood. There are so many out there who could use a little guidance and protection." Dona Rosa turned to him, her eyes wide with surprise. "Mike, that's a wonderful idea. You could make such a difference in their lives. Just think of the confidence you could instill in them." Tommy, overhearing their conversation, chimed in, "Yeah, that would be cool. I'd love to learn some moves." Mike chuckled, scratching his chin thoughtfully. "All right, kid. If you're serious about it, I might just let you join my first class. But it's going to be hard work." "I'm ready," Tommy declared, his determination shining through. As the days rolled on, the hotel staff felt the ripple effect of the kindness being cultivated in the kitchen. Inspired by Dona Rosa's initiative, a group of employees decided to come together to organize a clothing and food drive for the homeless in the area. They plastered colorful flyers around the hotel, announcing their intentions, and soon the whole team was buzzing with excitement. "Can you believe how many people are getting involved?" Sarah, the receptionist, said to a colleague as they sorted through donations in the lobby. "I thought it would just be a few of us, but look at this." Her colleague nodded, holding up a warm winter coat. "It's incredible. People are really coming together for this cause. I never knew how much support we could muster just by reaching out." The hotel's hallways echoed with laughter and chatter as employees shared stories and ideas about how to best serve their community. They brainstormed ways to make the drive more impactful, discussing everything from setting up donation bins to inviting local businesses to contribute. As the drive took shape, the team worked tirelessly, motivated by the shared purpose they had found. The hotel, once a symbol of luxury and exclusivity, now stood as a beacon of hope and solidarity. With each item donated, they felt a growing sense of connection, not only to those they aimed to help but also to each other. One evening, as they gathered in the staff break room, the mood was electric. "Okay, everyone," Sarah said, clapping her hands to get everyone's attention. "We're kicking off our donation drive this Saturday, and I think we should have some fun with it. How about we turn it into a little party? Like a carnival?" Tommy suggested, bouncing in his seat, his enthusiasm infectious. "Exactly," Sarah replied, her eyes sparkling. "Games, music, food. We'll make it a community celebration. Let's show everyone that we're here to support them, not just with donations, but with love and joy." The idea was met with cheers and applause, and everyone began to pitch in ideas for games and activities. Plans for a small stage for local performers emerged, and soon they were organizing everything from face painting to a bake sale. As the weekend approached, the buzz of anticipation filled the air. Tommy, who had been practicing martial arts with Mike, looked forward to showcasing some moves during the event. "I can't wait to show everyone what I've learned," he said, practically bouncing on the balls of his feet. "Just remember, it's not about being the best. It's about having fun and sharing what you know," Mike advised, putting a reassuring hand on Tommy's shoulder. "I know. I'll show them that anyone can learn, just like me," Tommy exclaimed, his voice filled with determination. The day of the drive arrived with an unexpected sense of community spirit. People from the neighborhood began to gather outside the hotel, drawn by the colorful decorations and the sounds of laughter. As the team set up tables and arranged the donations, they felt a wave of hope wash over them. Dona Rosa stood by the entrance, welcoming everyone with a warm smile. "Welcome. "Come in. We have plenty of food and fun waiting for you," she called out, her heart swelling with pride. Tommy, dressed in a crisp t-shirt and jeans, stood at the side, ready to demonstrate his moves. As he saw families arriving, he felt a rush of excitement. This was his chance to be part of something bigger, to show that he could make a difference. As the festivities began, the transformation within the Bennett Grand Hotel became evident. No longer just a place of opulence, it had turned into a sanctuary for kindness, a gathering point for camaraderie and compassion. The impact of Tommy's arrival had rippled through the lives of everyone around him, igniting a spirit of empathy that transcended the walls of the hotel. As rain clouds loomed over New York City, casting a somber shadow over the bustling streets, the rain poured relentlessly, drenching everything in its path, including an 11-year-old boy named Tommy Evans. He stepped into the opulent Bennett Grand Hotel, his small frame soaked and shivering. The grandeur of the lobby, adorned with crystal chandeliers and plush furnishings, felt like a world apart from the cold, hard streets he knew all too well. Tommy's heart raced as he scanned the room filled with well-dressed patrons, their laughter and chatter echoing like a distant melody. He felt utterly out of place, a mere specter among the living. Tommy's stomach growled audibly, reminding him of his desperate need for food. With a deep breath, he took a tentative step inside, determined to find someone who might understand his plight. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, he caught the eye of Sarah Mitchell, the hotel's warm-hearted receptionist. She had been organizing paperwork at her desk, but couldn't help but notice the boy's forlorn expression. Something stirred within her, and she felt compelled to approach him. "Hey there," Sarah said gently, bending down to meet Tommy's gaze. "You look like you could use some help. Are you okay?" Tommy hesitated, his lips trembling as he considered his response. The kindness in her eyes was foreign to him, and for a moment, he feared she might turn away, just like so many others had. I just wanted something to eat," he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of course. Come with me," Sarah replied, her tone filled with empathy. She led Tommy through the grand corridors of the hotel, the scent of gourmet dishes wafting from the kitchen. It was a world he had never imagined himself stepping into. Sarah pushed open the kitchen door, revealing the bustling scene inside. Enjoying the video? Subscribe to our channel to receive more interesting content. Click the subscribe button and stay updated with the latest news. Chefs were hard at work, chopping vegetables and stirring pots. "Donna Rosa," Sarah called, her voice cutting through the clatter of utensils. An older woman, with a warm smile and flour-dusted clothes, turned to face them. "Sarah Querida, who's this?" Donna Rosa asked, noticing Tommy standing shyly behind Sarah. "This is Tommy," Sarah explained, crouching down to Tommy's level. "He's hungry and could use some help." Donna Rosa's heart softened instantly. "Come here, Mayu Querido," she said, beckoning Tommy closer. "Let's get you something to eat. You must be freezing." As she moved about the kitchen, Tommy felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in a long while, he sensed that someone cared. While they prepared a simple meal, Tommy shared his story. "I lost my family in an accident," he confessed, his voice breaking. "I've been living on the streets since then." Donna Rosa paused, wiping her hands on her apron. "Oh, Mayu Deus," she murmured, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I understand more than you know. I had a tough childhood too. You're not alone, Tommy. We'll take care of you." Sarah watched the two connect, feeling a swell of inspiration. She wanted to do more than just offer food. She wanted to help Tommy find a path forward. "Maybe we can find you a safe place to stay," she suggested, her eyes bright with determination. As the meal was served, Tommy devoured the food with gratitude, feeling warmth spread through him. He hadn't realized how hungry he truly was. "Thank you," he said, looking between Sarah and Donna Rosa. Meanwhile, Edward Bennett, the hotel's austere owner, was oblivious to the unfolding connection in the kitchen. He sat in his office, surrounded by charts and projections, focused on profits and numbers. The world outside was just a backdrop to his business empire. When Sarah approached him later, she was filled with conviction. "Edward, we need to talk," she said, her voice firm. "There's a boy in our hotel, a homeless child. He needs our help." Edward barely looked up from his work. "What do you expect me to do, Sarah? We're running a business here. We can't afford to be distracted by every sob story." "But this isn't just a story," Sarah pressed, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "He's a child, Edward. A child who has lost everything. We have the means to help him. What do you want me to do? Hand out charity?" Edward shot back, his tone dismissive. He was a man who had built his empire on hard work and discipline. The thought of engaging with the less fortunate felt like a threat to his carefully curated world. "Edward," Sarah said, her voice softening, "we all have a past. We all have struggles. Remember that. You had help when you needed it. You can't turn your back on someone who needs it now." Edward's expression hardened. "I don't have time for this," he replied curtly, waving her away. As Sarah left his office, her heart sank. She had hoped to spark something in Edward, to lead him to see the value of compassion. But he remained ensconced in his world of indifference. Back in the kitchen, Tommy was beginning to feel like part of a family, even if it was just for a fleeting moment. Donna Rosa shared stories of her own life, her laughter mingling with the clinking of dishes. "Can I help with anything?" Tommy asked, his eyes lighting up with eagerness. "Of course. You can help me chop some vegetables," Donna Rosa said, handing him a small knife. "Just be careful, okay?" Tommy nodded, his hands trembling slightly with excitement as he began to chop. The warmth of the kitchen enveloped him, and for the first time in a long while, he felt safe. He could almost believe that he belonged somewhere. As the storm outside intensified, rain lashed against the windows, mirroring the turmoil within Edward. He looked out at the darkened skies, grappling with the weight of his responsibilities. The urgency of the moment struck him as he watched guests huddled inside, completely unaware of the struggles beyond the hotel's facade. In the kitchen, Sarah and Tommy were preparing a small fundraiser to collect supplies for the homeless. "We can ask the guests if they'd like to donate," Sarah suggested, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "Together, we can make a difference." "Do you really think they'll help?" Tommy asked, a flicker of doubt clouding his excitement. "I believe they will," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "People can surprise you when they see others in need." As they began to organize the effort, Edward stood at a distance, his mind racing with conflicting thoughts. He observed the earnestness in Sarah's eyes and the determination in Tommy's small frame. Something within him stirred, but he quickly dismissed it. He was a businessman, not a philanthropist. The storm raged on, but within the walls of the Bennett Grand Hotel, a different kind of tempest was brewing, one of compassion and community. Tommy and Sarah rallied the staff, and Donna Rosa worked tirelessly to prepare food for the homeless. The energy was palpable, and for the first time, the hotel felt alive with purpose. "Let's make this happen," Sarah cheered, her voice carrying through the bustling kitchen. "We can do this together." Tommy nodded, emboldened by the camaraderie forming around him. "I'll help in any way I can," he declared, his heart swelling with hope. As they worked, Edward watched from afar, a crucial decision looming before him. The sounds of laughter and determination filled the air, challenging the very foundation of his beliefs. He could feel the tide shifting, urging him to reconsider what truly mattered in life. But fear held him back, and he remained a spectator to the unfolding scene, grappling with the choice between self-preservation and the call to empathy. While the storm outside howled, inside the Bennett Grand Hotel, a different kind of storm was brewing, one that could potentially change everything for Tommy, Sarah, and Edward. In the midst of chaos and uncertainty, a glimmer of hope began to shine, slowly illuminating the path toward compassion, community, and transformation. Edward Bennett, the austere owner of the Bennett Grand Hotel, found himself in a state of unease. The rainy day mirrored his own internal storm. He watched the hustle and bustle in the hotel lobby through the large window of his office, where elegantly dressed guests hurried to their appointments, oblivious to what was unfolding outside their bubble of luxury. The hotel, with its opulence, was both his pride and his prison. However, the recent story of Tommy, the young homeless boy who had entered the hotel in search of a meal, echoed in his mind. Edward remembered the helpless look in the boy's eyes and the determination that shone within them. That child, so young and already facing so many adversities, challenged everything he believed to be important. Edward had always been obsessed with success and profit, but now he couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at stake. "You can't just ignore this, Edward," a voice whispered in his mind. A voice reminiscent of Sarah, the receptionist who had shown such generosity. She had confronted Edward, questioning his lack of empathy. "Everyone has a past, and everyone can change their lives," she had said, and those words haunted him. He remembered his own childhood, the days when poverty was a constant reality and how a simple act of kindness could have changed his fate. In that moment, Edward found himself trapped in a moral dilemma. He could continue his business life, comfortable in his indifference, or expose himself to vulnerability and help others. The idea of getting involved in the food and clothing drive that Sarah and Dona Rosa were organizing made him restless. What would the other hotel staff think of him? How could he join them? A man who had always been seen as cold and distant. The fear of appearing weak or even ridiculous held him back from acting. He recalled a day when, as a boy, a homeless man had given him a warm smile, even amidst his own misery. It was a gesture he had never forgotten. Edward felt a knot form in his throat at the thought of how kindness could blossom in unexpected places. He wanted to be more than a mere spectator of life. He wanted to be part of the change, but insecurity paralyzed him. Edward stood up from his desk and began to walk around the office, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He looked at the photograph of his family, a reminder of simpler times, before success became his sole motivation. A silent anger formed within him, directed at himself. He didn't want to be the man who merely accumulated wealth. He wanted to make a difference. But how? How could he allow himself to be vulnerable, to expose his weaknesses? For a moment, he hesitated, imagining what would happen if he decided to join the team. What would his colleagues think? What would the hotel guests say? This insecurity kept him stuck longer than he would like to admit. But at the same time, the image of Tommy, sitting alone at a kitchen table with Dona Rosa, his hopeful expression and open heart, began to shape his decision. "If you don't open yourself to the world, Edward, you'll never know what it can offer," he thought. "And if you don't allow yourself to be vulnerable, who will care about you?" The internal struggle continued, but something inside him began to stir. He knew he needed to act, that he needed to join them. With a deep sigh, Edward finally decided. He would go to the kitchen, join Sarah and Dona Rosa, and maybe even Tommy. He realized that perhaps what he feared most was exactly what he needed to do. Connect with others, set aside his interests and concerns for a moment, and be part of something greater. As he left the office, his hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a repressed emotion he couldn't name. He descended the stairs of the lobby and, upon seeing the kitchen, noticed Sarah and Dona Rosa laughing, while Tommy helped prepare the food. The scene was simple but full of life and energy. Edward hesitated again, but determination began to grow within him. "You can do this, Edward," he whispered to himself. "You can be more than a businessman. You can be a human being." He took a deep breath and, as he approached, was greeted by Sarah, who looked at him with surprise and a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Edward, you came!" she exclaimed, her voice filled with excitement. "Yes, I decided I should join you," Edward replied, his voice a little softer than he would have liked, but now without hesitation. "I want to help." Tommy looked up, and the expression on the boy's face changed from surprise to a wide, genuine smile. "You're really going to help? That's amazing," he said, his voice full of enthusiasm. Edward felt warmth spread through his heart. He was there, not just as a boss, but as a human being who wanted to make a difference. And in that moment, he realized that this was the first time in a long time that he felt a clear sense of purpose. "Yes, Tommy," Edward replied, smiling back. "I want to make a difference." Dona Rosa, who had been listening to the conversation, smiled and nodded, already starting to organize the ingredients. "Then come on, Edward. We have a lot of work to do." As he joined them, Edward felt that life was beginning to change. He was finally allowing himself to be part of something that transcended money and success. And as the group came together to help those in need, Edward realized that true wealth did not come from material possessions, but from the ability to connect with and love others. As rain clouds loomed heavily over New York City, casting a gray shroud over the bustling streets. Inside the opulent Bennett Grand Hotel, the ambience was a stark contrast to the dreariness outside. The lobby was adorned with intricate chandeliers, polished marble floors, and a soft symphony of laughter and conversation among the well-heeled guests. Yet amid this lavish setting, Edward Bennett, the hotel's stern owner, remained preoccupied with his business dealings, his brow furrowing deeper as he pondered over financial reports. In the midst of this luxury, the entrance swung open, and in walked Tommy Evans, a small, scruffy figure, drenched from the downpour that raged outside. He stood at the threshold for a moment, heart racing as he took in the scene before him. The opulence was overwhelming, and he felt the weight of his ragged clothes and unkempt hair. Yet, hunger gnawed at his insides, pushing him forward. With every step, he felt the curious gazes of the guests lingering on him, their expressions a mix of confusion and disdain. But Tommy's determination was stronger than his fear. He needed food, and the hotel was his only hope. Across the lobby, Sarah Mitchell, the kind-hearted receptionist, noticed the boy's timid demeanor. Her heart ached at the sight of his worn-out shoes and the way he clutched his thin jacket around him as if it were armor against the world. With a gentle smile, she approached him. "Hey there," she said softly, kneeling to meet his eyes. "Do you need help?" Tommy hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted some food." The admission felt heavy on his tongue, laced with the shame of his circumstances. "Come with me," Sarah said, her voice warm and inviting. Without waiting for a response, she led him through the grand foyer toward the kitchen, her heart swelling with compassion. "I think we can find something to eat." As they entered the bustling kitchen, the aroma of fresh bread and savory dishes enveloped them. Donna Rosa, the hotel's head chef, looked up from her chopping board, her hands steady despite the chaos around her. She raised an eyebrow in surprise at the sight of the boy, her expression quickly softening as she took in his appearance. "Who is this, Sarah?" Donna Rosa asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "This is Tommy," Sarah replied, her voice filled with kindness. "He's hungry and needs help." "Hungry, huh?" Donna Rosa said, her heartstrings tugging at the sight of the boy's hollow cheeks. She moved closer, kneeling down to his level. "What do you like to eat, Tommy?" Tommy's eyes widened at the question, as if he had forgotten what it was like to want something so simple. "I like pasta," he finally managed to say, a hint of hope creeping into his voice. With a warm smile, Donna Rosa turned to the stove. "Pasta it is. Let's get you a nice plate, shall we?" As she moved about the kitchen, her movements were filled with a nurturing energy that made Tommy feel safe for the first time in a long while. While the pasta boiled, Sarah and Tommy sat at a small table in the corner of the kitchen. The boy began to open up, sharing snippets of his life. "I lost my family in an accident a while back," he said, his voice trembling. "I've been living on the streets since then." "I'm so sorry to hear that, Tommy," Sarah said, her eyes glistening with empathy. "You're not alone anymore. We'll help you however we can." Donna Rosa returned with a steaming plate of pasta, the inviting aroma wafting through the air. "Here you go, my dear," she said, placing the dish in front of him. "Eat up. You need your strength." Tommy's eyes lit up as he took his first bite, the warmth of the food filling him with a sense of comfort he hadn't felt in ages. "This is really good," he exclaimed, his voice barely muffled by the mouthful of pasta. As they sat together, sharing moments of laughter and stories, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose stirring within her. She looked at Tommy, whose eyes sparkled with gratitude, and at Donna Rosa, whose nurturing spirit radiated warmth. "We need to do more for kids like him," she thought, her resolve strengthening. Meanwhile, Edward Bennett remained in his office, buried under a mountain of paperwork, completely unaware of the life-changing moments unfolding just a few feet away. He was a man who had built his empire on the foundations of ambition and success, but somewhere along the line, he had lost sight of what truly mattered. Later that day, Sarah decided to speak with Edward about Tommy. She knocked on the heavy oak door of his office, her heart racing with anticipation and fear. "Edward, can I talk to you for a moment?" she called out. "Come in," he replied, his voice authoritative and dismissive. As she entered, she noticed the dim lighting and the clutter of papers strewn across his desk. "I met a boy today," she began, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "His name is Tommy, and he's living on the streets. He just lost his family, and he's only 11 years old." Edward looked up, his brow furrowing in annoyance. "Sarah, I'm busy. What does this have to do with the hotel?" "It has everything to do with it," she insisted, her passion igniting. "We have the resources to help him. We can't just turn a blind eye to the suffering around us." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "And what do you propose we do? We're a hotel, not a charity. Is that really how you want to see this place?" Sarah challenged, her voice rising slightly. "We have the power to make a difference. Wouldn't it be better to be remembered for our kindness rather than just our luxury?" Edward shifted uncomfortably, the words striking a chord deep within him. He had built his life on the pursuit of wealth, but at what cost? He had always kept his emotions at bay, afraid of vulnerability, yet here was Sarah, a beacon of hope and compassion, urging him to reconsider. "Sarah, you don't understand," he said, the frustration evident in his voice. "I can't let emotions dictate business. We have a reputation to uphold." "Reputation?" Sarah echoed, shaking her head. "What good is a reputation if it's built on indifference? You once told me that everyone has a past. Maybe it's time you remember yours." Edward fell silent, her words resonating in his mind. He thought back to his own childhood, to the times he felt neglected and alone. The memories washed over him like a tide, and he began to see the world from a different perspective. "Fine," he finally said, his voice softer. "I'll think about it." As Sarah left the office, she felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps Edward could change, could learn to embrace the very humanity he had so long ignored. But it was a long road ahead, and she was determined to help Tommy, no matter the obstacles. That evening, as Tommy settled into a cozy corner of the kitchen, he overheard laughter and chatter echoing from the lobby. He felt a sense of belonging he hadn't thought possible. Donna Rosa continued to prepare meals, her nurturing presence a balm for his weary soul. In the weeks that followed, the hotel began to change. Inspired by Tommy's determination and Sarah's unwavering spirit, a ripple of kindness spread through the staff. They organized meal drives, inviting the homeless community into the warmth of the hotel. They provided food, clothing, and even companionship, transforming the Bennett Grand Hotel into a sanctuary for those in need. Edward watched from the sidelines, his heart slowly thawing as he observed the compassion blossoming among his employees. He began to join in, albeit hesitantly at first. Each time he participated, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders, as if he were shedding the layers of apathy he had worn for so long. It was during one of these gatherings, filled with laughter and shared stories, that Edward finally decided to step forward. He approached Tommy, who was helping serve food alongside Sarah and Donna Rosa. Taking a deep breath, he spoke, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Tommy, I want to thank you for showing us all what it means to care," he began, his eyes sincere. "You've reminded me of the importance of community, and I want to be a part of that change." Tommy looked up, surprise etched on his face. "Really? You want to help?" Edward nodded, his heart swelling with a newfound sense of purpose. "Yes, I want to help. I want to make a difference." As the room erupted into cheers, Tommy felt a warmth envelop him, a feeling he had longed for. Edward, too, had found a place among them, breaking free from the chains of his past. Together, they began to forge a new path, one filled with compassion, empathy, and a commitment to uplift those who had once been forgotten. In that moment, amidst the laughter and shared joy, the Bennett Grand Hotel transformed into more than just a place of luxury. It became a beacon of hope for the community. In the heart of New York City, a transformation was brewing at the Bennett Grand Hotel. It was a chilly afternoon, the kind that made the streets glisten with puddles, each reflecting the towering buildings and the lives lived within them. Inside the hotel, however, a different kind of magic was unfolding. Edward Bennett, once consumed by the pursuit of wealth and status, found himself stepping onto a path he had never considered, one of compassion and community. As the days passed since Tommy Evans had stumbled into the hotel, his impact was undeniable. Edward had witnessed the young boy's resilience, and the way his mere presence ignited a flame of humanity within the hotel's staff. It was a spark that began to light up the cold corridors of the Bennett Grand, warming hearts that had long been indifferent to the struggles of those outside their gilded walls. Tommy, with his bright eyes and hopeful spirit, had become a beacon for the hotel staff. Sarah Mitchell, the gentle receptionist who had first taken Tommy under her wing, was now leading the charge for change. She had organized meetings in the staff room, where discussions of how to help the homeless community blossomed into actionable plans. "We can't just serve them food. We need to serve them hope," she would often say, her voice filled with passion. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the bustling hotel lobby, Edward found himself standing by the entrance, deep in thought. He watched as Sarah and Tommy eagerly discussed their plans, animatedly gesturing as they brainstormed. The warmth of their laughter echoed around him, and he felt a stirring in his heart. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging, of purpose. "Why are we not doing this on a larger scale?" Tommy had asked one day, his small hands clenched into fists as he spoke. "Everyone should know that they can help. Everyone should feel what we feel right now together." Edward, who had been listening from a distance, felt a pang of guilt. He had spent so much time isolating himself in his world of luxury that he had forgotten the power of community. The truth hit him like a wave. He had the resources to make a difference, and yet he had hesitated, trapped in a cycle of self-interest. It was during one of those conversations that Edward finally made the decision to step forward. He approached Sarah and Tommy, who were poring over a map of the city. "I want to help," he said, his voice steady but filled with an undeniable tremor of vulnerability. Sarah looked up, surprise etched on her face. "Edward, you want to help?" "Yes," he affirmed, nodding. "I've realized that I can't just sit back and watch anymore. I want to be part of this." Tommy's eyes sparkled with excitement. "You mean it? You really want to help us?" "Absolutely," Edward replied, a newfound determination washing over him. "Let's make this an event that brings the community together." As the plans took shape, the hotel staff rallied behind Edward's newfound commitment. Together, they organized a large distribution of food and clothing for the homeless in the area. The anticipation grew, and the hotel became a hub of activity. Banners were hung, and volunteers from within the hotel and the surrounding community began to flood in, united by a singular purpose. On the day of the event, the atmosphere was electric. Tables were set up in the hotel's grand ballroom, adorned with colorful decorations and overflowing with donations. Edward stood at the entrance, greeting everyone with a warmth that was foreign to him just weeks before. The transformation in him was palpable. He was no longer the austere businessman, but a man who was rediscovering the joy of connection. "Thank you for coming," he exclaimed to each guest, his smile genuine as he ushered them in. "Today, we're not just giving away food, we're sharing kindness." As the event commenced, the ballroom filled with laughter and chatter. Families from the neighborhood mingled with hotel staff, and the lines of those in need grew shorter as more people came forward to help. Edward watched in awe as Sarah and Tommy moved through the crowd, their energy infectious, drawing more people into the fold. "Look at this," Tommy exclaimed, his face flushed with excitement. "Everyone is working together. It's amazing, isn't it?" Sarah replied, beaming. "This is what it's all about." Throughout the day, Edward found himself swept up in the collective spirit of giving. He helped serve meals, shared stories with guests, and even sat down with some families to learn about their lives. Each interaction chipped away at the coldness that had once enveloped him, revealing a man who longed for connection as much as he had desired success. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow through the ballroom windows, Edward took a moment to step outside onto the hotel's terrace. He breathed in the crisp air, feeling a sense of fulfillment that he had never known. It was then that Sarah and Tommy joined him, their faces aglow with joy. "Today was incredible," Sarah declared, her eyes shining. "I can't believe how many people came together." Tommy nodded vigorously. "And we can do this again. We can make it even bigger next time?" Edward chuckled, a sound that felt foreign yet liberating. "Absolutely. This is just the beginning." In that moment, he realized that the true wealth in life wasn't measured by money or status, but by the connections forged with others. As he looked at Sarah and Tommy, he knew they had changed him for the better. "Thank you both," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "You've opened my eyes to what really matters." "Thank you for joining us, Edward," Sarah replied, her smile softening. "We couldn't have done it without you." Tommy grinned brightly. "And together, we can help even more people. Just think of all the lives we can touch." As they stood together, a sense of unity enveloped them, a bond that transcended their different backgrounds. Edward felt a warmth in his heart, a feeling of hope that he had long thought was lost. In that moment, he understood that they were not just helping others. They were building a community, a family. And as the stars began to twinkle above the New York skyline, Edward knew that he had finally found his true purpose. On a chilly afternoon, the Bennett Grand Hotel was bustling with activity. The luxurious lobby, adorned with chandeliers and intricate decor, was a stark contrast to the stormy weather outside. Tommy Evans, an 11-year-old boy who had been living on the streets, stood at the entrance, drenched and shivering. He hesitated for a moment, feeling like a fish out of water among the elegantly dressed guests. Despite his fear, hunger drove him forward. As Tommy approached the reception desk, he caught the eye of Sarah Mitchell, the kind-hearted receptionist. Sarah was known for her compassion and often went out of her way to help those in need. She could see the desperation in Tommy's eyes and felt compelled to assist him. "Hey there, young man," she said gently, leaning over the desk. "You look like you could use some help. Is everything okay?" Tommy hesitated, unsure how to respond. His heart raced as he considered his words. Finally, he managed to say, I just wanted some food. I'm really hungry." Sarah's heart ached at his admission. "Of course. Come with me," she replied, gesturing for him to follow her to the kitchen. As they walked through the hotel, Tommy marveled at the opulence around him. Gold accents, plush carpets, and the scent of gourmet meals filled the air, making his stomach growl even louder. In the kitchen, they found Donna Rosa, the head chef, busy preparing lunch. When she noticed Sarah and the boy, she paused, wiping her hands on her apron. "Who's this?" she asked, her voice warm and inviting. "This is Tommy," Sarah introduced him, her tone filled with empathy. "He's had a rough time and could use a meal." Donna Rosa's expression softened. "Come here, Tommy. Let's get you something to eat." She rushed to grab a plate and began filling it with fresh bread, vegetables, and a hearty stew. "You must be starving. We can't have you going hungry here." As Tommy dug into the food, he felt a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. After swallowing a few bites, he began to share his story with Sarah and Donna Rosa. "I lost my family in a car accident a few months ago," he explained, his voice trembling. "I've been on the streets ever since." Donna Rosa listened intently, her eyes glistening with tears. "Oh, Corrido, that's heartbreaking," she said, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I know what it's like to struggle. You're welcome to stay here for a few nights if you need a safe place." Tommy looked up, surprised. "Really? You'd do that for me?" "Of course," Donna Rosa replied, smiling. "You can help us in the kitchen too. It'll be fun." As days turned into weeks, a bond formed between Tommy and Donna Rosa, with Sarah often joining them. Tommy learned to cook simple dishes while Donna Rosa shared stories of her childhood, instilling hope in him. Meanwhile, Sarah was inspired by the connection blooming between them and felt motivated to do more. However, Edward Bennett, the hotel's austere owner, remained oblivious to the changes happening in his establishment. He was a man driven by profits, often dismissing anything that didn't contribute to the bottom line. One afternoon, Sarah decided it was time to confront Edward. She led Tommy into his office, where he was busy reviewing financial reports. "Edward," she said firmly, catching his attention, "I need you to meet someone." Edward looked up, irritation flaring in his eyes. "Sarah, I'm quite busy right now. Can't this wait?" "This is Tommy," she insisted, her tone unwavering. "He needs our help, and you need to hear his story." Tommy stood nervously beside Sarah, his heart pounding. He took a deep breath and began to explain his situation, but Edward's gaze drifted back to his papers, showing little interest. "I don't have time for sob stories, Sarah," he said dismissively. "We have a business to run." Frustrated, Sarah stepped closer, her voice rising slightly. "Edward, just because it doesn't impact your profits doesn't mean it isn't worth your time. Tommy deserves compassion. We all do." Edward's expression hardened, but Sarah's words lingered in the air, challenging his long-held beliefs. As she left the office, he remained seated, wrestling with her confrontation. Days later, Edward found himself wandering into the kitchen, curious about the laughter and camaraderie he had been hearing. To his surprise, he found Tommy and Donna Rosa cooking together, their spirits high. Tommy's face lit up as he caught sight of Edward. "Mr. Bennett," he exclaimed, "want to help us make pasta?" Edward felt an unfamiliar warmth at Tommy's invitation. I'm not sure that's my area of expertise," he replied, chuckling awkwardly. "Come on, it'll be fun." Tommy insisted, his enthusiasm contagious. Edward hesitated, but as he watched the joy radiating from Tommy and Donna Rosa, he felt a stirring within him. Later that evening, Edward sat alone in his office, reflecting on his life. He thought about his own childhood, marked by loneliness and the pressure to succeed. He had built an empire, but at what cost? A sense of longing washed over him as he realized he had sacrificed meaningful connections in his pursuit of wealth. The following day, Edward made a decision that surprised even himself. He approached Sarah and Tommy, who were organizing a community event to support the homeless. "I want to help," he announced, his voice steady. "I want to be part of this." Tommy's eyes widened. "Really? You mean it?" "Yes," Edward replied, a smile breaking through his usually stern demeanor. "I've realized that there's more to life than just business. I want to give back." As the community event unfolded, a sense of unity filled the air. Edward, Tommy, and Sarah worked side by side, distributing food and clothing to those in need. The hotel staff rallied together, creating an atmosphere of warmth and kindness that resonated throughout the city. Amidst the hustle and bustle, Tommy noticed a familiar face in the crowd. His heart raced as he approached a woman who stood there, her eyes scanning the gathering. "Mom?" he whispered, hope and disbelief blending in his voice. The woman turned, her expression shifting from uncertainty to recognition. "Tommy!" she cried out, rushing forward and enveloping him in a tight embrace. "I thought I'd lost you forever." As they embraced, Edward and Sarah watched in awe, their hearts swelling with joy. The reunion was bittersweet. Tommy learned that this woman was in fact his older sister, who had been desperately searching for him since the accident that had torn their family apart. Edward stepped forward, his voice filled with emotion. "You have no idea how happy I am to see this. Your brother has been such a light in our hotel. Thank you for taking care of him," she said, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't found him." In that moment, Edward understood the power of family, love, and community. He felt a profound sense of purpose, realizing that his life's work could extend beyond mere profits. Surrounded by Tommy, his sister, Sarah, and Donna Rosa, he joined them in a group hug, celebrating the new connections and the chance to make a difference in the world. As they stood together, Edward felt a warmth blossoming in his heart. In that embrace, they all shared a renewed sense of hope, understanding that love and compassion could indeed transform lives, including his own. The storm outside had finally passed, leaving behind a clear sky filled with possibilities, and for the first time in a long while, Edward felt he was exactly where he was meant to be. We hope you were moved and inspired by our story. We want to hear your opinion. Leave a comment below, share your impressions, and your own stories of resilience and hope. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next emotional videos. Join us on this journey and follow more incredible stories. See you next time.